Alright, 4. Update codification of the Oil and Gas Disclosure Requirements Regulation SK. The proposing release proposed to update Codifying Security Exchange Act for the Industry Guide of the 2 the Disclosure Oil Gas Operation Industry Guide 2 for the Industry Guide 2 currently sets forth the most of the disclosure of the oil and gas companies provides regarding to the reservoir reserves production property operation regulation SK reference for the industry guide with the instruction 8 to item 102 for the description of the property item 801 security act for the industry changes and item 802 Guide 2, Instruction 8, Item 101, Description of Property 801, Item 102, Description of Property, Item 801, Security Act, Industry Guides, and Item 802, Exchange Act, Industry Guides. However, the Industry Guide 2 is itself a design period of the regulation SK with the Code of Federal Regulations or in the Code of Federal Regulations. Rules we adopt today codified with the content of the Industry Guide with the new with the subpart 12 of the regulation SK. A. Revision of the items 102 to 801, 802 of the regulation SK with the instruction item 102 of the regulation SK with as well with the 801, 802 regulation SK currently referenced with the industry guide because we're codifying industry guide of the 2 the disclosure for the new part 1200 regulation SK with the revising instruction item 102 with the flex change we're sure eliminating with the reference item 801, 802 with the industrial guide because the industry guide will cease to exist upon the effectiveness of the amendments up to date. In addition, with the instruction 5 of the item 102 of the regulation SK with the currently prohibit the disclosure of the reserves other than improved oil gas reserves because we're adopting rules to permit disclosure of the probable possible oil gas reserves provisions. Instruction 5 to limit the applicability extractive of the enterprise other than oil and gas production producing activities such as mining activities. Similar instruction 3 of Item 102 regarding production, reserve location, development, and nature for the company interest will no longer apply with the oil and gas producing activities, so we also are eliminating instruction in mining activities. Finally, we eliminate instruction 4 with the item 102 regarding the ability of the commission staff to request supplemental information, including reserve reports. This instruction duplicated the Security Acts of the Rule 1418, Exchange Act 12B4 regarding the staff general ability to request supplemental information. Alright, B. Proposed new subpart 1200 regulation SK codifying industry guide regarding disclosure by companies engaged in oil and gas producing activities. Overview, we're adding a new subpart 1200 to the regulation SK with the codified the disclosure requirements related with the companies engaged with the oil and gas producing activities. New subpart largely include the existing requirements of industry guide 2, however, we revive the requirements up to date, but then provide better clarify with the respective level of detail of the required for the oil and gas disclosure, including geographical area within by the disclosure need to be made with the made of formats tabular for the presentation of these disclosure editions. Subpart 12 contain the following new disclosure requirements, many of which have the request of industry participation. Disclosure of the reserve of the non-traditional sources, bitumen, shale, and the oil and gas reserve, the obtain optional disclosure of probable possible reserves. Optional disclosure oil and gas reserve sensitivity to the price, disclosure of the development, proved undeveloped reserves, disclosure of the technology with the established conditions to reserve estimates, disclosure of the company's internal control, reserve estimation, qualification, business entity, or individual preparing auditing reserve estimates. Disclosure based on the new definition of the term geographic area. We discuss each of these proposed new items below. Item 1201, General Instruction Oil Gas Industry Specific Disclosure. We're adding a new Item 1201, Regulation SK with the item set forth with the General Instruction Subpart 1200. New item contained with each paragraph of the performing the following tasks. Instruct companies for which oil gas producing activity material provided with the disclosure specified in Subpart 1200. Clarify, although the company may present specified with the 1200 information with a tabular form, with the company modified with the formatted table ease of the presentation and with additional information with the combined 2 or more required table 2 with the definition rule 410A with the regulation SX applied 1200 defined with the term geographical area. Geographical area received significant comments with regarding the proposed definition for the term geographical area with the proposed requirement of the disclosure content and continent by continent country require containing 15% or more of the company's reserve with sedimentary base field with containing 10% or more of the company's reserve. Several of the commenters concerned with the proposed definition would apply with a much detail with the disclosure, particularly with the baseline or the field level. They were concerned with the amount of the detail would disclose with the 2 with the complex incoherent, but there were particular occurrences for the extension standard disclosure of the reserves such as production wells, acreage, and comments. Commenters also believe that the disclosure, particularly about the field, could cause competitive harm in the future property sales, transaction, utilization agreements, and the other asset transfers. Some commenters also believe that some of the disclosures may be prohibited by foreign governments. One comment noted that the separate determination field of the basin of the reservoir of the large of the production basin reserves with large production sharing agreement is not possible due to the concession-wide cost-sharing terms. 8 commenters recommended that the determination of the appropriate geographical disclosure should remain with the management consistent with the state of the financial accounting standard number 69. However, 2 commenters indicated that the country-by-country breakdown would be adequate. 4 commenters supportive of the proposed percentage threshold of the geographical disclosure, stating that it would increase the understanding of the total energy supply, leading to better decision by policymakers. One of the commenters supported 15% threshold within the countries. For countries, as noted, proposing release of a different interpretation among oil and gas companies over the level specifically required when a company is breaking out of the reserve of disclosure based on the geographical area required by Instruction 3, Item 102 of the regulation. As case, some of the companies currently brought organized with the reserves only by the hemisphere with the consistent with the standard statement of financial accounting standard 69 requires reserve the disclosure to be separately with the disclosure of the company for the home country with the final geographical country. Disclosure separately with the scope of the company for the home country. Foreign geographical is defined with the foreign geographical area and individual countries, group of countries as appropriate for the meaning. Disclosure circumstances for the standard 69 was issued with the operation oil gas for the company with become the much more of a diversely globally. For many large oil gas producers, the majority of the reserves are now overseas with a material amount of the individual countries, even with the individual fields or basins. We think the greater specific simple disclosing reservoir with a group of countries would benefit the investors in certain cases if it may be necessary to meet with the requirements of Item 102 of Regulation SCA. Countries in which many of the companies operate may have significant reservoir reserves are subject to unique risks such as political instability. However, we recognize the disclosure detailed meaning to track with the overall disclosure that we have with the revised definition by the geographical area to mean with the appropriate meaning involved the disclosure under the company particular circumstances. 1. By individual countries. 2. By groups of countries within the continent. 3. By continent. The definition is substantially same with the definition currently provided in the SFAS Standard 69. As provided with the adopted specific percentage threshold of the geographical breakdown reserve of the estimates production respect with the production final rule of the disclosure production each for the country and field containing 15% more over the company's approved reserves and left prohibited by the country in which reserves are located, raising with the proposed 10% threshold for a field disclosure production and 15% to make the threshold consistent, however, rather than requiring disclosure based on the percentage of the amount of the company reserves of an individual product. As proposed, the final rules were required disclosure based on the percentage of the company's total global oil gas approved reserves based on the barrel oil equivalent. With respect to the reserves estimate of the final rule of the required disclosure of the reserve within the country containing more than 15% of the company's approved reserves, as with the production disclosure of the 15% of the threshold would be based on the company's total global oil gas approved reserve rather than individual products are proposed. Registrant need not to provide with a disclosure reserve of the country with the containing 15% more of the registrant provide with the reserve of the country's government prohibited the disclosure of the reserve of the country. We're not adopting the requirement we propose to disclose shale with sediment basin of the field we share. Commenters concerns that there is potential for the competitive harm of the sale of the discovery of the future property sale of the transaction utilization agreements of their asset transfers. More would recognize that there will be a situation in particular field of the main company's significant portion of the company's reserve in the foreign country, for compelling a company to provide with the effective disclosure of the rules that do not require the disclosure of the reserves in the country containing 15% of the company's reserves in the country. Prohibited disclosure reserve of the particular field of the disclosure field reserves in the country would have effect disclosing reserves in particular fields. For example, if the company 25% of the reserve of the country A, and country A's government prohibits the disclosure of the reserve fields within country A, if almost all of the company's reserves in country A are located with a single field of the company would not be required to specify the amount of the reserves located in country A. B. Tabular design. We approve of the requirement of the more reserve the disclosure of the disclosure industry guide 2 with the design with the tabular format with the commenters encourage use of the standardized table for the reserve of the disclosure. Another belief that the company should be able to recognize supplement with a combined table with a better representation with the company trade with however the two commenters believe that the rule should not be proposed specific tabular format in general with these commenters believe that the company should have the flexibility to present data in format that are more relevant and meaningful for the investor who with the tabular and narrative will continue to believe that certain circumstances of the requirement of the disclosure lend themselves into the tabular disclosure format and believe standardized such tables will improve the readability comparable to disclosure among companies who have the respond with the comments received that have made several revisions to individual disclosure items, including whether the disclosure it must be presented with a tabular form when we discuss each below. Item 1202 disclosure of reserve of the existing instruction 3 of the item 102 of the regulations set S through K requires the disclosure extractive of the enterprise proved reserves with respect to the oil and gas producing company replaced the instruction by adding new item 1202 regulation SK that contains similar disclosure requirements regarding companies prove the reserves. However, the new item 1202 would expand with the requirements of 102 by specifically permitting with the disclosure probable and possible reserves, permitting the disclosure of reserve with a non-traditional sort of addition because we have no longer distinguished between the types of the accumulation. The item containing only one table with separate columns with the different final products, specifically oil and gas, synthetic and synthetic gas, other natural resources sold by the company. 8. Oil and gas reserve table. The new item 1202 requires the disclosure aggregate with the geographical area with the reserve estimates using the price and cost under existing economic conditions for each of the product type of the following categories provided to develop the reservoir. Proved developed reserves, proved undeveloped reserves, total proved reserves, probable developed reserves optional, probable undeveloped reserves optional, probable developed reserves optional, possible undeveloped reserves optional. A form on the table is set forth below. Summary of the oil and gas official year end based on the average of the official year prices and show the reserve categories. Your reserves, your oil and natural gas, synthetic oil, synthetic gas, and product A. Provided developed content A, content B, country A, country B, other continents consistency. Undeveloped continent A, B, country A, B, other countries in continent B, total approved. Total approved, probable, developed, undeveloped, possible, developed, undeveloped. Alright, disclosure final product solid with the table that requires the disclosure final product sold with the company specifically oil, gas, synthetic gas, other natural resource of the company processed with its natural resource with extracted such as bitumen and synthetic oil with the gas prior to selling the product. It may include the oil reserves done with the synthetic oil gas columns as noted below. We revive the proposal that would have required the disclosure by the type of the accumulation addition with the response of the commenters. We have revised the definition of oil and gas producing activity so that the company can use the price of the synthetic oil for the gas to determine the economic producibility of the reserves because of the economic processing activity relevant to determination whether to extract underlying resources. However, the company extracts as a resource of the oil and gas, such as bitumen and sell the product without processing it into synthetic oil or gas, must disclose the reserves of the natural resource. Although the company extract activities would be considered the oil gas producing activity, the definition of the term such that the company would not benefit for economic and processing of the resource because of the price of the determines whether the scope of the company extract the resource of the price unprocessed resource. Therefore, the company may not establish reserve estimates based on the price of the upgraded product. Similarly, if the company does not exist itself extract natural resources but purchase the natural resource for processing or is paid to process the natural resource, it may not claim reserves either of the resource or a processed product. 2. Aggregation. As proposed with the reserve report with the table that would be aggregation from the company total level of the reserve is determined with the individual wells, reservoirs, property field of the projects, regardless of whether the reserves were determined using the deterministic probabilistic method. The reported reserves should be simple with the arithmetic sums of all the estimates of the well, reserve, property field of the project level with each of the reserve category. 8 commenters agree with the aggregation should not be permitted beyond the field property for the property level of the consistent petroleum reserve management system. 3. Optional disclosure of the probable and possible reserve the company may, but not is not required with the disclosure probable possible the reserve of the table the company disclosure probable possible the reserves must provide with the same level of geographical detail with as much of the respect for the probable resource reserves much state would whether the reserve of the developed undeveloped edition with 1202 with required with the company to disclose the relative uncertainty associated with these classifications of reserves estimates by permitting disclosure of all 3 of these classification reserve the objective would enable the companies to provide investors more insight into potential reserve of the base of the management of the company's may even the benefit base for the decisions, investment, resource development. More for the commenters addressing the issue support with the permitting disclosure probable possible the reserve field documents that would believe the disclosure would provide with a more complete picture of the company's full portfolio of opportunities. One commenter noted the information that is already available on the company website and with the press release that have the commenters supporting the proposal caution that they could be significant variable among disclosures. Other commenters expressed the concern with the disclosure unproved the reserve to contend Steve, the voluntary disclosure would be acceptable. These commenters were concerned that the disclosure may cause the investor expose companies increased litigation because of the inherent uncertainty associated with the probable possible reserve. They noted the various technologies may be used to support these estimates. Several of the commenters opposed the permitting disclosure probable possible to reserve the commissioning files for some of the reasons again that they were concerned with the inherent uncertainty associated with the type of the reserves. This estimate may lead into reverse investor confusion and misunderstanding. They believe that the broad range of technology method of the companies to support the estimate would lead to the inconsistent disclosure among the companies. We know that the numerous oil and gas companies disclose unproved of the reservoir's website with the press releases. Practice does not appear to have created confusion within the market. However, the understanding commenters concerned with the probable possible the reserve estimates are less than certain than proved reservoir estimates. So many of the increased litigation risk by making these disclosures voluntary. Company could accept with its own discretion and be able to provide the market with a disclosure. Some of the commenters was concerned of the voluntary disclosure by some of the companies raised the confusion as to why the other companies don't disclose the classification of reserves. One of the commenters concerned with the voluntary disclosure of the increase of the market pressure for all the companies to disclose the probable possible reserve of the estimates. Considering the fact that many of the companies already make with the disclosure in the public, we don't believe that this is an adequate reason for the prohibiting of the following disclosure that may help to the investors. 4. Resources not considered reserved because of the permitted disclosure probable possible reserve that are revising existing instruction 5 of the item 102 of the regulation on scale, continuing to prohibit the disclosure of the estimate of the oil and gas resource of the other than the reserves have the estimated value of the such for the resource of the document in public file with the commission unless for the information of the requirement of disclosure in the document by foreign or state law. With the 5 commenters recommended that the rule permit disclosure all categories reserve the concluded, but do not require the reserve of the one commenter believe with the prohibition act with the decree for the reserve of the deprived of the public market significant information without meaningful enhancement investor protection ultimately had harm and efficiency of the developed U.S. market with the U.S. companies raising capital. Commenter also thought such of the restriction could also encourage companies to perform outside of the U.S. Another commenter believed that the uncertainty resource items benefit communicated by reporting full range of the estimate. In addition, another commenter believed that the clear disclosure would allow for the concern about the investor misunderstanding the estimate resources do not qualify with the reserve. The commenter noted with the excluding resources that are not reserved and consistent with the international standard. The fact that the resource of the disclosure of the U.S. on websites and press releases, we continue to concern the of the resource of the speculative but may lead to the investor incorrect conclusion. Therefore, we are adopting the proposal of the probable disclosure of the resource of the then reserves. However, the consistent existing in instruction 5 of the company when they continue the disclosure such estimate the non-reserved resource of the commission of the following related to the acquisition, merger of the consolidation of the company with the previously provided with the estimates of the person offering, acquiring, merging, consolidated with the company, otherwise acquiring company securities. Several of the commanders recommended with the commission maintaining the exception so that the company shareholder would not be informal disadvantage compared with the counterparty when they accessing the merger. We agree with the commenters have retained or accept the revised instruction 5 on adopted day. B. Optional reserves sensitivity and analyst table. The rules we're adopting require the company to determine whether the oil or gas resources are economically producible based on 12 months average price of the proposal. Adopting the optional reserve sensitivity table. The table that would permit the company to disclose additional information over the investors. So if the sensitive to the oil and gas reserve that has the price fluctuation and for the company to provide such disclosure may choose the different scenarios. If they are wished to discover the table to provide, but it also discloses price and cost of the schedule, the assumption on which the alternative reserve the estimates are based. 12 commenters support the permitting such sensitivity analysis. Some believe that it would provide the investor a better view of the management and analysis of the future price. But one recommended providing set price change at 10% for sensitivity analysis. Two of the commenters believe that the different circumstances may require different types of sensitivity analysis, both with respect to the range of the prices used in the format of the presentation. We agree that the appropriate range of the sensitivity analysis may vary depending on the situation. Therefore, proposed we are not specifying a range of price to be used. However, if the 5 commenters specifically oppose requiring such analysis, the belief that the requirement would cause the confusion. Comparability. 3 commenters oppose the sensitivity analysis because of the different price of the misled investors. We are adopting the table that proposed as volunteer disclosure rather than a requirement. However, the proposal of the table that would require the disclosure of the assumption behind varying estimates believe that the disclosure will mitigate the investor confusion. In addition, we remind companies of the Item 303 regulation SK of the management discussion analysis final condition, financial condition result of the operation, and require the discussion of known trends. Uncertainty may include the change of the price and the cost of forming the optional reserves sensitivity analysis table set forth below. Sensitivity reserve price of the principal product type of the principal price scenario, such as price in the cases scenario 1 and 2, approved reserves oil, gas, and product A, probable reserves oil, gas, product A, possible reserves oil, gas, product A. Separate disclosure of the conventional continuous accumulation under the proposal of the new item 1202 that would have the required company to disclose the reserve of the conventional accumulation separately with the reserve of the continuous accumulation. Non-commenters recommended the disclosure based on the final product. These commenters for the proposal of the segregation disclosed here based on the type of the accumulation that is involved with the belief that the scope of the disclosure would be too complex to detail with little of the investor's addition. Some of the commenters point out that the separation may be impossible to cover the sum of the fields both of the conventional and with the continuous accumulation. This would make allocation costs arbitrary, but they have 4 commenters support with the definition separate with the disclosure for the type of accumulation. 1 commenter believed that such a disclosure would allow the investor to assess the impact with the unconventional sources of the reserves. Although we agree with conceptually with the focus with the reserve of the disclosure should be on the final product, we reckon that with the production of the oil and the gas varying sources can have significant different economics. Extracting oil gas from the continuous accumulations can be such of much more labor resources intensive than extracting oil gas from traditional well, they often require the greater ongoing efforts and expense after all the initial extraction equipment is in place, making such operation more sensitive to the price fluctuation. We agree that the commoners disclosure base for the end of the product sold would provide the most effective the base of the distinguishing reserve disclosure based on the type of the accumulation which of the reserve held. Therefore, we advise that the disclosure be based on the end of the product sold by the company with the respect for the end of the product. New item 1202 that makes for the distinction between oil and gas on one hand, synthetic oil gas on the other, and synthetic products require the process of the raw source of resources material either while it's still in the ground or in the suit or or after its extraction before it can be used the refinery feedstock as a natural gas. This profit currently include bitumen and upgrading as well as the coal liquefaction gasification. However, the resource of the continuous accumulation of the coal bed methane do not require such process. Therefore, they are not associated with the same level of the ongoing cost of the once of the well will have been drilled to recover the ground resource of the already oil and gas in the case of the coal bed methane with the ground resource of the methane trapped in the coal bed. With the coal bed methane would not be considered a synthetic product. D. Preparation reserve the estimates of the reserve audit for the proposing relief of the proposed required a company disclosure of whether or not the technical person primarily responsible for the preparing of the reserves estimates of the process possess certain specified qualifications subject to the list for the control maintaining objective of the commenters is addressing the issue of the proposed requirements. However, many of the commenters Commoners appeared to believe that the disclosure requirement would pertain to every person involved with the estimation process, but if it happens to know that such disclosures would be voluminous and adding unnecessary complexity to the disclosure. 4 commoners suggested to clarify that the disclosure limited to the chief of the technical person who oversees the company's overall reserve the estimation process, which, if the intent with the proposal of 5 commoners support with the disclosure because it helps the user to understand the objective of the quality of the reserve estimates. It was our intent to limit the disclosure of the technical person primarily responsible for overseeing the reserve estimates. However, there may be the confusion with respect to the point based on the footnote which stated that we sought disclosure about the person with the primary responsible for the actual calculation estimate of the audit. By that term, we don't intend to include any person making actual calculations. We reserve the ultimate with the reserve of the estimates overseen by the top of the management, which may or may not have the reserve estimation expertise. With the focus on the final rule of the primary the technical person responsible for overseeing the preparation of reserve estimation process, we have revised the language of the rule, clarified by the point. 2 commenters know that it was inconsistent with the precise of the disclosure, some of the reserve of the experts. For the other experts, one of the commenters recommended the rule with the required extract with the language included with the clear disclosure of the portion of the reserve estimate of the third party expertising and field consent of the concept of the expert on Securities Act and different from the disclosure week of the seek for the regarding the qualification objective of the person responsible for preparation of the oil and gas reserve under the Security Act. The disclosure must be made with the company reserve of the representative of the disclosure based on the authority with an expert, although the Security Act with the concept of the expert will continue the relevant the reserve of the disclosure are in and incorporated with the Security of the Act of filing with the company represents disclosure based on the authority of the expert for the new rules requirement of the disclosure of the reserve of the prepared with the auditor and the company exchange act with the report with the intent of the help of the investor to determine whether the reserve estimates are which are highly technical have been prepared by a qualified objective of the person, regardless of whether the person is employed with the company. However, we agree. Commoners prescribe a list of the qualification objective. The requirements may be to the bridge for all situations with respect to the technical qualifications. Some of the commoners know that the licensing requirement can be greatly among can vary greatly among jurisdictions. Commoners also believe that the disclosure of the person objective is unnecessary because the management is required to install the appropriate internal control to ensure reliability of the reserve estimates. In fact, some commoners recommend that we limit the disclosure and description of the company's internal controls to the company's technical assistance routine with the management and with the board review of the approval of the profit, the internal audit of the process of the extent to which the company, with the external party, with the estimate, with the audit reserve of the estimates, and some of the description of the qualifications of the company's typical reserve estimates are filed with these commoners with the recommendation of adopting the rule with the required of the company to provide with the general discussion, internal control of the observer objective of the reserve estimation process with the disclosure of the qualification technical person and primarily responsible for preparing reserve estimate for the conducting reserve audit with the company disclosure so that the reserve of the audit have been performed regardless of whether the technical person is an employee or an outside third party. We do not propose the be sought within comment, which for the rules should require the company with the retain with the independent third party with the prepare conduct reserve audit of the company's reserve estimate. Most of the commenters urge for the commission not to adopt such a requirement. They believe that the company's internal staff of a particular large company with a general with a better position to prepare for the estimate and that there is a potential lack of a qualified third party engineer or other professionals available to conduct with increased work with the would result in so for the requirement. We agree that these commenters are now adopting the requirements for the independent third party prepare and conduct reserve of the audit with the company's reserve of the estimates. Reserve audits for the contents of the third-party reports, proposing relief of the proposal on for the company represents estimate of the reserve prepared with the audit by a third party. For the company must file with the report with the third party with the exhibit of the relevant registration statement of the report. 2 commenters believe that the company with the description of a third-party report would be sufficient because of the reports contain sensitive information. However, another commenter would concern with not filing the report may lead to mischaracterization by the company, and the commenter supported filing with the report and third-party reserve estimators or auditor believe that the commission should have determined the contents of the report with the 2 commenters support with the following return letter as an exhibit that is not fully reserved the report because of the containment of the properly information proposed at the top of the new rule. From the company representing the third party to prepare with the reserve estimate with the conduct with the reserve audit with the reserve estimate with the company must file with the report. Third party exhibit is with the relevant registration statement that the report need not to be full of the reserve report, which will often vary detailed volumes, rather than these reports could be shorter than report summary of the scope of the work with the perform with the conclusion. The third party of the reports must include the following disclosure based on the Society of the Petroleum Evaluation Engineers Audit Report Guidelines, the purpose of which for the report began prepared from which it was prepared with the effect of the date of the report, the date of which for the report was completed, proportion of the company total reserve covered by the report with the geographical area which for the covered the reserves are located, the assumption of the data method, the procedure for the conduct of the reserve audits, include percentage of the company total reserve of the view in the connection with the preparation report with the statement that the assumption of the date of the method, the procedure, the appropriate for the purposes served by the report, discussion of the primary economic assumption, the discussion of the possible effect of the regulation, ability of the registration to recover the estimated reserves, discussion regarding the inherent with the risk of the uncertainty of the reserve estimates, the statement of the third party, usually all the method procedures that have been considered necessary under circumstances to prepare the report, signature of the third party of the additional report with the relay of the reserve audit, must contain the brief summary of the third party conclusion with respect to the serve the estimate, finally with all the disclosures are made and incorporated with the Security Exchange Act with the registration statement of the company with the made full out of the consistent with the third party of the exhibiting, and final, in the proposing release, we propose to define the term reserve audit with the process of reviewing the term of the pertinent fact with interpretive of the assumption made with the result of the estimated reserve of the prepared by others, rendering the opinion of the appropriate and of the methodologies employed with the adequacy, quality of the data relied upon with the depth of the thoroughness of the reserve estimation process of the classification of reserves appropriate with the relevant definitions of the reasonableness of the estimated reserve quantity in order to disclose the reserve audits that have been conducted with the report resulting from the review by representing examination at least 80% of the portion reserves covered by the reserve audit. We are substantially adopting the first sentence for the definition proposed. However, the response for the comments received is not adopting with the proposed second sentence for the definition of the term of reserve audit with the two comments support with the proposed 80% threshold regarding the proportion of the reserve that the reserve audit must view with it in order for the company to characterize the auditor's work as the reserve audit with the reserves audit. Another commenter believed that 80% threshold was appropriate for preparing reserve estimates, but three commenters believed that an audit should simply discover the percentage that was audited. One of them noted that the reserve audit performed on the rolling basis believed that the disclosure work done with the required third-party report makes a bright line percentage for taking unnecessary for the company conduct with the reserve audit, but on the rolling basis if it's appropriate for the shareholder to be aware of the fact that we're not adapting proposed 80% threshold, believing the disclosure scope of the review and enable investors to assess significant attributed to reserve audit. Process reviews. In proposing a release, we solicited a comment regarding whether it would be permit the company to discover that it has a third party to perform processes. Review of Society of Petroleum Engineers, SPE. Reserves audit name of the training of the same of the define of the process of review of the investigation process of the qualified with the experience of the training of the equivalence that for the reserve of the auditor with the draft of the adequacy of the effectiveness entities internal process of the control relative to the reserve estimation. However, the understanding of the note the process of the review should not include the opinion relative to the reasonableness of the reserve quantities could be limited to the process of the control of the system reviewed. The Society of Petroleum Engineers standards say that although such reviews may provide value to the entity with external and internal process, reviews not sufficient prior to the establishing appropriate classification quantity of the reserve should not be represented to the public as being equivalent to reserve audit. Five commenters believe that internal process of the reviews help in for the promoting accuracy and effectiveness. Such as companies should be permitted to disclose them. However, one of the commenter concerned that although the process of review can be helpful to the company, disclosure may give the investors a false sense of the security. Two commenters have suggested that if the company disclose the performed process review, it should be clearly disclosed the process review is. Alright, we agree that the process review can be helpful to the company's ultimate investors. However, we agree that the company disclose the third party with the performed process of the review to clearly disclose the details surrounding process review, such for the new rules of the tenant treat of the process of the review similar to the reserve audit. If the company disclose the hire with the third party to conduct process review, must file with the report with the third party exhibit the relevant registration statement or report if the disclosure are made with incorporated in Securities Act recognition statement. The company must file with the consent of the third party exhibit the following item 1203 provide approved undeveloped reserves proposed requiring tabular disclosure aging approved undeveloped reserve of the proposed item 1203 with the required with the oil and gas company to require the table showing that each for the last 5 official years prior to type proof of the reserve the estimated yield of the current price for the costing of the following categories: proof of the undeveloped reserve converted, proof of the developed reserve during the year, not net investment required with the convert with the proof of the undeveloped reserve of the provider. Prove the developer reserve during the year. Numerous commented the concern of the proposed 5-year table to comply with the investor understand. Express concern of the proof of the table that may easily with the investors not clearly attributing the cost of the year, in which corresponding with the proposed undeveloped reserves are converted because of their much costly may have been spent previously. Here's additional commenters know about the maintenance of the data for the cost of the companies currently not always capture the type of the information when the management does not use it in running business. A commenter suggests that ultimately one disclosing quantity of the undeveloped reserve is material to do with the progress of the converting possible undeveloped reserves. And 3, material change for the current of the year. The 3 U.S. senators recommended requiring disclosure of the development plans. In addition, if the table to believe the requiring reporting investments, planned investments in oil and gas development would provide investors with certainty about the company's intention to develop federal lands they have at their disposal. However, the 3 commenters you upload for the disclosure of the company plans to drill the expected capital expenditures because of the disclosing their business plan may cause competitive harm and might expose them to litigation result of the difference for their plan. 6 commenters support of the proposed table. We recognize the concern of the proposed using undeveloped resources reserves table proposed by confusing investors because they would not be attributed to capital expenditure for the corresponding reserve that are developed as an alternative to the proposed table. The adopting rule for the required of the company to disclose the following narrative form: total quantity of proposed undeveloped reserves at year end, any material use of change of the proposed undeveloped reserves that occur during the year, including possible proposed undeveloped reserves converted into proved developed reserves, investment progress during the year of the control possible undeveloped reserves and improved developed oil and gas reserves, and the explanation of the reason for the material concentration possible undeveloped reserves in the individual field countries that remain undeveloped for 5 years more after the disclosure of possible undeveloped reserves. These disclosures would have been required each for the proposal would have been presented with a tabular format. We have the narrative approach that these disclosures provide for the companies with a better vehicle for the to explain the status of the possible probable undeveloped reserves of the track record of developing such reserves rather than requiring forward-looking of the information about the company's plan to develop the reserve that may lead to the aggregation company's capability to actually convert such reserves and will be relieved with the disclosure of the company's verified established track record for converting such reserves, including an ability to obtain financing such activities would be better indicate likelihood of the company's success developing reserves in the future. Specified required disclosure regarding company's failure of the developed material concentration possible probable undeveloped reserves for 5 or more years addressed. Commenters concerning that the company may have no intention to develop such reserves. Alright, and 1204 oil gas production. We propose the Codified Industry Guide to the disclosure regarding oil gas production, item 1204 regulation as gave the tabular form and with greater detail. One commenter did not believe in the separation product with the sales product for the production cost base with oil that would relate with the oil well, gas wells would be valuable to investors and believe that the company does not use the information manage the business and does not maintain a system to capture the information on the basis. So tracking such data would be required with a costly change within the situation. 2 commenters believe that it would not be possible to separate the production of the process and product must make units extract different products. One commenter also recommended the production not aggregated type of the accumulation. We decided to adopt the 1204 for the pros rather than codifying with the existing industry guide 2 with the disclosure several reasons with the consistent with the industry guide 2, the disclosure item 1204, adopt the required disclosure for each of the prior 3 official year for the production by final product sold with the oil, gas, other products. In addition, for the same time period, the company may disclose the geographical area of the average sale of the price of the including trend for the unit, oil, gas, and other product produce, the average production cost not exceeding the volume, ad volume, severance tax per unit and product. However, the unit, unlike the industry guide, with the disclosure must meet with the geographical areas of each of the country field containing 15% of the more of the registration provided by the preserve of the oil equivalent barrels basis. Similarly, we are codified with the instruction industry guide for the item with the one commenter recommended the maintenance suggest some of the existing instruction in the industry guide, with the first instruction codified with the industry guide, with the clarifies the net production should include only the production owned by the registration and produced in the interest of less royalties. Production due other have within special situation foreign production before any royalties may be provided. If more appropriate, if the net before royalty production figures are furnished. Change uses of the net production should be noted with the second one, the instruction which offer the industry guide serves of the production natural gas should include only marketable product natural gas as in the sole base of the production will include the dry residue wet gas depending on whether the liquids have been extracted before the registration of the transfer tile flared gas. Injected gas consumed operation should be omitted with the recovered gas left with the gas and reproduce. Gas should not include until the sale of the synthetic gas market itself, but it should include with the natural gas sale, with the adding of the instruction of the industry guide, with the instruction state with any of the product. This is bitumen sold with the custody, with the transfer price, with the conversion of the synthetic oil gas, with the product, with the production transfer price, with the production cost, should disclose separately from all the other product distinction instruction, with the necessary to become of the existing industry guide too, with the disclosure requirement only required separate disclosure based on whether the end of the product was oil gas, with the instruction merely clarified with the disclosure only the item must be based on end product, which may not be an oil with the gas because of the amendments will permit the disclosure of the reserve of the other products such as bitumen and forth of the instruction of the codified with the industry guide state with the transfer price of the oil and gas natural synthetic produced may be determined in accordance with the SAFS standard 69 fifth instruction codified the industry guide was clarified with the average production cost per unit production to compose even the production cost disclosed by the SAFAS standard 69 unit production should be expressed in common units production oil gas and other products converted into a common unit with the measure of the basis of the computing harmonization instruction add products from unconventional source of the existing disclosure item industry guide 2. 6. Item 1205, drilling and other exploratory development activity. Proposed the codifying industry guide 2 disclosure regarding drilling activity. Item 1205, the regulation SK with the tabular form of the special revision industry guide 2 disclosure, including applying with a new definition of the term geographical area, adding the 2 categories as well. Extension wells and suspended well. 3 commenters believe that the disclosure required under this proposed item will become too detailed. One of the commenters believe that the number of the wells being drilled does not provide any of the accurate picture of the company's drilling activity because of the increased use of the horizontal wells. Some commenters also did believe that creating a new category of the extension well with a suspend with a well with might be meaningful with the burning with the add in detail with the exceed with the value of the information investors. One pointed out that the determination whether the well counts for the extension well would be difficult because of the multiple purpose of drilling. After considering above the comments, we decided that the top of the proposed revision of the existing industry guide 2 with the disclosure recommended that some of the companies use advanced drilling technology. Proposed the disclosure may not be a good idea and good indicator of the extent of their exploratory the development activities, although we believe the disclosure still important. The name of the company therefore would decide with the codified existing disclosure found with an industry guide to with relate with the drilling activity provision or not to require tabular disclosure. However, the pros were adding new provision item of the require the company disclosure for the exploratory development activity regarding oil and gas resource the extracted by the mining technology required with the we are no included so for the resource and with the definition of oil and gas producing activities. Item 1206, present activity. 1206, go over the items of an industry guide 2, which call for the disclosure present activity, go over the number of wells and the process of being drilled, including wells temporarily suspended, water floods in the process of being installed, the pressure of the maintenance operation, any of the related activity, material importance of adopting the item 1206 as proposed. Item 1207, the delivery comment, and 1207, the codified the existing item 8 with the industry guide 2, which calls for the disclosure arrangements which of the company is required to deliver specified amount of oil gas, however the company intended to meet such for the commitments. We're not adopting any substantive change to the disclosure currently called by the item 8 industry guide 2. However, we are requiring restructuring, rewording, disclosure to meet the easier for the understanding, including separating embedded list of the separate subparagraphs, making general plan with the English version, and propose those revisions intent with the change with the substance of the disclosure. Alright, 9, 1208, oil, gas, property, wells, operation, and acreage. The proposal of the codified disclosure, oil, gas, property, well, for the operation, and acreage. Item 1208, regulation S through K, tabular form as well, with a special revision of the existing disclosure for the regarding with the applying with a new definition for the term, the geographical term, area, adding the language for the better illustrate for the type of the property, the type of the disclosure for those of the property, including the following identification, description, and generally accompanied with the material of the property, planet, official installation indication of general geographical area in which they are located, indicate whether they are located on the onshore or offshore. Description of any statutory mandatory requirements, relinquishment, surrenders, back-ends, change of the ownership. Six commenters believe that it was not necessary to enhance the section industry guide 2 because the requirements are already covered. Item 102 of the requirements of SK of the commenters were practically concerned with the segment of the disclosure of the product type of the accumulation by geographical location. They believe that the level of detail was not helpful to the investors would impose the added cost of the companies because of the apparently do not collect detailed information. Moreover, 7 of the commenters that the well count disclosure is no longer meaningful because of the technology of the horizontal drilling. They thought that in the light of the new technology, well count with the disclosure could be misleading. As in the case of the drilling activity, agree with the proposed adding detail to make disclosure cumbersome and additional. Some of the disclosure may be less importance to many companies because of the new drilling technology. Therefore, we are merely codifying the existing industry guide 2 disclosure without revision. Section 5. Guidance, management, discussion, analyst companies engaged in oil, gas producing activities.